Let me introduce myself. I'm Rose Wesson. I am the Interim Associate Provost for Research, and the colleagues here are Maria Lima, who is the Associate Dean for Research in the School of Medicine, and Susan Perkins, who's the Dean of Science. We've been working together on restarting research, wow, since probably the shutdown back in March. So as you can tell from our updates, I think we are in week maybe 25, 26 of our research restart. Maria, I hope you're on the line, but I do see Susan is here. So we're going to do the presentation kind of all together. And Maria and Susan, if you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to impart as we go through, feel free. So I want to start off in talking about what's going on in the city. And this Research Restart team did a town hall back in June before we restarted research, and we showed a similar chart at that time. What's, in my case, important about this chart is the right-hand side, and I think you can see my mouse, where all of these categories are increasing. So what we're looking at are the confirmed and probable cases in the city of New York, which on a 7-day average, it's about 20,000 folks. The hospitalizations, about 1,200, and actual deaths, 125. Now, we've been seeing these numbers since March, and admittedly, I think the entire country has become somewhat numb to these numbers. But if you're thinking about the actual deaths due to COVID in the city of New York, it's mind-boggling. And that we've been going through this now for 9 months, so to speak, and we're seeing these increasing trends. I do want to delve down a little bit further just to show what we mean by these increasing trends. So this data is available on this www.1 website, which is the City of New York statistics. Now, there is a different website that's run by the state of New York, and you can go there and you can punch in different cities in the state of New York. If you punch in New York City on the state of New York website, you'll notice that the numbers don't match up. And generally, the numbers for the state of New York are lower than the numbers the data that we have for the city of New York. And the New York Times did an article on why and who's reporting when and what numbers are counted. But the general gist of both is that the numbers are increasing. Our COVID cases are increasing. Our hospitalizations are actually increasing. And I always like to point out this little area here. There's also this gray area where it says the data from the most recent days are incomplete. Now this data I grabbed, for some reason the date isn't on here, but well, you can see here, I grabbed this data yesterday. I didn't go back to the website today to see what's happening here, but our trends are increasing. And our deaths, as we said, are increasing. What we've been reporting and looking at on a daily basis is what we call the 7-day positivity rate for New York City. What caused a trigger here on campus is when we began above this 5% line. Now this data is straight off the website. We want to be below this line. This is from New York City. I mean, I didn't add that to the graph. This is from the New York City guidance that in end of November, we started trending above 5%, and we've stayed at 5% since then. This is the positivity rate, the average 7-day average positivity rate. People have also said, well, maybe we should look at the hospitalizations and not necessarily the positivity rate. Yeah, we can do that too, but the trend is the same. We're increasing. Things are not getting better in the city of New York. They're getting worse. And then, not to beat a dead horse, but this data is for the entire country in case the cases, the deaths, and our hospitalizations. We all can see the news, we read the newspapers, we know that things are bad across the country. Our cases are going up across the country, our deaths are going up, and our hospitalizations are going up across the country. This number here has grown today. This data is from the 14th of December. I think, I know it may have been this morning, maybe 305, 310, something like that, deaths. And as I said, we become numb to that, but somebody on one of the news programs said that this translates into like 10 or 11 9/11s. The number of people that have died as a result of this. And the reason that I like to, I don't like it, but I feel it's important to stress this is that City College is a commuter school. We get people on campus that are coming daily from all 5 boroughs and also from faculty, students, staff coming from New Jersey, some coming from Connecticut. So, what's going on in our city and also our neighboring states and even across the country? We come into contact with people across the country, affect what can happen on our campuses. All right, so enough doom and gloom, Rose. Let's move on to what's going on actually. Um, this slide is from our previous town hall meeting that we had in June. And at that time, we talked about the fact that City College, we were having various stages of research, while New York City was talking about phases of research, and that our phases and our stages may not be linked, and the terminology may be somewhat different. We also said back in June that we would monitor our stages and that we would move forward, or in some cases, it may be necessary to move backwards. And then if New York City regresses, then City College will not likely progress. And in some cases, it may be necessary to regress. And these are and these were our research reopening stages that we put forward in our research reopening plan back in June and in May. So remember, initially, we were at stage 0. This is when we were shut down, essential research only, COVID, essential personnel only, essential research only, COVID related research. We then moved into stage 1 where we were preparing to open. And we said, okay, let's have a occupancy rate of 10 to 15%. And we redid our equipment. We wanted to make sure our labs were up and ready for our students to come back and for the faculty to come into our labs. We then moved into stage 2, where we started time sensitive research. If you had sponsored, if you had deadlines that needed to be addressed, then you were granted access to go back into your labs. We never really got to stage 3. Stage 3 is where we had 50 to 60% occupancy. We never really had that. Where we were is that we were about 30 to 40% occupancy in our labs. So this is where we were. What we're suggesting now is that we need to ramp back down to 25% or less in terms of our number of occupancies, the occupancy levels of our labs. And we had this as of 12/7 that we were returning based on what's happening in our community, that we think it's safe to return to about a 25% or lower occupancy level in our labs. So what, so for our ramp down, if you recall, in November, on November 18th, the New York City positivity rate reached 3%. And at that level, we said, okay, additional researchers are approved for 1-day access only. We wanted to start um, regulating how many people are we bringing onto campus. So if we're approving additional researchers beginning in November, we were only approving them for 1-day access at a time. On 12/7, on December 7th, a couple of weeks later, the positivity rate exceeded 5%. And at that point, researchers were requested to reduce the lab occupancy. So how are we asking researchers to reduce the lab occupancy? So each lab is asked to reduce the occupancy to 2 persons per lab at any given time. So what does this really mean? We say 2 persons per lab, not 2 persons per PI, not 2 persons per research group. What we're saying is 2 persons per lab at any time. So within a lab, researchers can stagger their arrival times. They can work in the morning, they can work in the afternoons, they can work in the evenings. They can stagger their days that they're on campus, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Maybe some people come in on the weekends, some people don't. Maybe you are a researcher and you have 2 labs. You have 2 actual physical labs. So if that happens in your case, then you can have 2 persons in lab A and 2 persons in lab B. Maybe you've got a colleague that's doing research remotely and you're able to set up some of your researchers in their labs or in their space. Then that's another lab that you may be able to use in order to spread your researchers out. So again, it is not 2 persons per PI. It is not 2 persons per research lab. I'm sorry, per research group. It's 2 persons per lab. And we're asking that the labs submit schedules. So to say that researcher A is going to be there on these days at these times, researcher B is going to be there at these days, these times, in this particular room, in this particular office, however you're planning to schedule it. But in some cases, maybe that's not feasible. Maybe it's not ideal. And if that is the case, then we're asking to know why. And then rather than submitting that plan, you should submit a communication plan as to how do you plan to reduce your occupancy to less than 25%. I've been asked, or, Susan Maria and I have been asked, well, we've got these particular researchers that may need to have be educated, may need to have training. So I have to have 2 people in there at that time. And then researcher John Smith also needs to come in for a couple of hours. Okay, all right. What we're talking about is a general overall reduction. We don't want 10 people in the lab at one time. If there may be a period of an hour or 2 where researchers are overlapping so that there might be 3 in the lab, that's not the end of the world. But we're asking that each lab reduces their occupancy to 2 persons And if for some reason you can't, then let us know why. And we can talk about maybe we can set up something to accommodate those specific cases. These plans should be submitted to the RRB, that is the Research Reopening Review Board. And the communication plans, as well as the occupancy plans. So I've also been asked, okay, so what happens if we need further research reductions? What are we planning along those lines? Well, there are two different courses of action right now. One is the current campus reopening plan, and the other one, which is also a viable option, is that the city or state may regulate what happens next. So first, if we talk about the campus reopening plan, currently the campus reopening plan states that if 3 or more people in one building go home sick, it doesn't say that if they test positive for COVID. It says if they go home sick with COVID-like symptoms over a 2-day period, or over 4, or if there are 4 in the course of a week, then the building will close. Now we can discuss whether these are outdated guidelines, whether they should be revived, whether they should be reviewed, whether they should be revised, whether they should be reviewed. But these are the current guidelines that a building will close if 3 or more people go home sick. And so that's another reason that we're trying to reduce our occupancy, to keep these buildings open, to keep doing the research. And then the campus reopening plan says if 2 buildings are closed, then the campus will return to stage 0. And stage 0 is essential personnel only. So what we're attempting to do is in these upcoming months is we want to keep our buildings open, and we want to keep the research ongoing by reducing the chances of 3 or more people going home sick. The other criteria, or the other reason that further research reductions may take place, may come from the city or the state. On Monday, both de Blasio and Cuomo said that a pause is quite possible over the next month, and everyone should be prepared. By a pause, that means the city shuts down, like we were back in March and April, because the rates in the city are rising. So we all recognize that we had Thanksgiving and we expect to see increasing rates. We recognize that the holidays are coming up. We expect to see increasing rates. We recognize that winter is coming. We got a big snowstorm coming. At least last I heard it was still coming. And people are going to be indoors more. We anticipate that will cause our numbers to rise in the city. We also recognize that, yes, people are getting vaccinated now. We have vaccines that are coming on board, but it's not likely that it will affect, although Susan was just saying that Cuomo says we're going to be the first state with no cases or everybody vaccinated or something like that. But it's not likely that that's going to happen before the spring or the summer. So we must be able to get through the winter months. We got to get through January. We got to get through February.
The governor's quote today was, yes, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a very long tunnel.
Yes. So we're saying that researchers should not begin new long-term experiments. We may have to shut down. We may have to shut down labs, wings, floors, buildings. Just be aware that that we may need to shut down, and it wouldn't be because CUNY said it. It wouldn't be because CCNY said it. It may be because the mayor and the governor say that we have to shut down. And these closures may take place quickly, and that's another reason that just to be cognizant of what's going on in our city, that we're asking that the research continue at lower occupancy levels. The other question that comes up is, okay, so we've reduced our occupancy levels. What's the criteria to increase or resume or go back to where we were prior to December 7th? So we have said that City College may, and that's the key word here, may return to current research levels if the average positivity rate falls below 5% and is flat or declining for 7 consecutive days. This is a matter of discussion. It has not been decided. It has not been finalized. Is this the right criteria to use? Maybe we should be using antibodies. Maybe we should be using how many people have been vaccinated against COVID. We're not there yet. All we know is that we're asking to reduce levels, and the criteria to resume research, we're still working out those details. So in the meantime, we ask that researchers continue to work safely. Masks are required at all times. Practice social distancing, the 6 feet apart. Up-to-date C14 certification. Remember, we are working safely due to COVID, but we're working safely due to the hazards that also may be present in our labs. And when we reduce occupancy, we don't want people working alone or unauthorized. We want to make sure that we know what's happening with our neighbors in our labs. And that, we've constantly said that EHOS is doing our C14s, they're doing them remotely, they're doing our lab safety trainings. We have to keep those up. And we must be responsible enough to make sure that our students are also keeping up their safety training, their lab safety training. All right, I'm talking too long, so let me just wrap this up here. We still want to make sure that if there are cases, if students actually feel ill with COVID-like symptoms, that it should be reported. Students, staff should also, both students and staff should report. And these are the names and email addresses to which student, faculty, and staff should report. We know that there is testing. The note from the chancellor said that there were specific testing sites across the country and that CUNY students receive priority. Some people have taken advantage of those sites, and there's been mixed feedback, meaning that priority works in some cases, and in other cases, it still might take so many hours before you are actually tested. But we do want to continue the reporting and the testing as we move through the winter months. So, as not to end on a negative note, let's talk about some positives here. One of the things that I am impressed by is that although we have had only 30 to 40% occupancy over these last 3 or 4 months, we are still doing excellent research. And these awardees, I've got 2 pages of awardees here, are only the fall 2020 awardees. When I showed this slide yesterday in the CDI meeting, people came or people wrote in the chat, what about my award? I received this award such and such a time. So the next time I'll talk about all FY20 awards. But right now, these 2 pages of awards are only the awards that have taken place since September, since we've been back on campus with classes. We've been back on campus actually since June or July doing research. Um, I know Mitch is on here. I don't know if Lucas is on here or not, but Lucas sent me a note in the chat yesterday saying, "Well, Rose, the reason we can do this level of research is because we have preliminary data and before COVID hit." Well, that may be true, but what we're trying to do is to keep the research going such that next semester we will also have that preliminary data such that we can continue to have these awards. And not only the dollar amounts here, which are very impressive, but the topics in terms of machine learning, and the agencies, NIH, Department of Education, NYSERDA, the Army, AFOSR, I already said NIH, Department of Energy. These are great researchers and research topics that are happening at City College. The second page being NASA, with Department of Transportation, Naval Research, and looking at sensing. We've got work that's going on in terms of power, wireless networking, underwater research, excellent researchers. And there's no way that any of us are attempting to stop research. That's not where I'd like to be. I want to be able to say that although we went through a pandemic here in the city of New York, the country, and across the world, at City College, we continued research, but we continued research safely. That's the goal, that our students are safe, our staff are safe, and the faculty are safe as we conduct this research. Um, Enough of my lecturing, right? Okay, so there's one more thing, maybe a couple of more things that I'd like to say before we turn it over to questions. We also have a working group. So, I've got this platform here, so I'm going to say a little bit more than the fact that we're ramping down research. But we have also started a post-award working group. The goal of the working group is to improve the workflow management for post awardees. These are things like onboarding of graduate students, the financial administration, that is paying invoices, some of the things that faculty have challenges with as a result of doing the research and also trying to do the post award management. So the members of the group are from Department of Science, Grove School of Engineering, School of Medicine, and the Grants Office. And so our first meeting will actually be today for this group. But what we're trying to do is that we know that there are a number of challenges. And the fact that we're all working remotely has somewhat increased those challenges. And so as people sometimes say that, you try to take a bad situation in terms of our pandemic and everyone working remotely, what can we learn from it and how can we improve our processes such that even though we are still remote, when we come back on campus, things will be better. And so that's the idea of this working group. We'd like to hear from faculty. We know some of the challenges, but we also need to prioritize those challenges. So we'd like to have input from faculty too in this area. But our first meeting will be today, and we'll update you on the progress of the group. I think the last thing maybe is just to talk about the holiday hours. Um, Campus will be closed on Thursday, the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, and Friday, December 25th. Campus will also be closed on New Year's Eve, the 31st, and January 1st, New Year's Day. ASRC, CDI, and NAC will be staffed on those days. However, Marshak and Steinman will be locked. So any researchers who are wishing to access Marshak or Steinman on the days that the campus is closed, they will have to call public safety. And public safety is available between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. So what I always say here is that the fact that Steinman will be locked during those days should not prohibit researchers from coming in if they need to come in. They should call public safety and public safety will let them in. I think that's it. Please submit questions through the chat. And Susan, Maria, if you're online, and I will definitely try to answer the questions. So do we have questions?
No,
Clear as a bell.
the School of Engineering is well informed. Oh, we do have a question. Mitch has raised his hand.
Oh, somebody has to unmute Mitch.
We've muted him.
He's well, you know.
All right, thank you. So it's probably quicker to actually ask the question verbally, which is, what could you talk a little bit more about how you're going to define essential research? Because essential research was a very narrow definition in the spring.
Right.
Essential research, now that some teams have started long-term projects with best of intentions back in July and have huge financial investments that can't be, could you sort of help us to three-dimensionalize that?
So one thing we can say for sure is that COVID-related research will continue. That was true back in March and April. That will probably be true again if we have to shut down. We will also discuss how to continue research, that if there's a significant financial loss, does it make sense to shut this down? And if the answer is no, it does not make sense to shut it down, then how can we continue such types of research with the fewest number of researchers? So I don't anticipate that there will be a blanket 0 to 5 researchers per building mandate, but we will have to discuss how to determine what research is allowed to continue during the shutdown. I don't have an answer, but those discussions is where we will begin. How to make sure that we don't negatively impact researchers and research groups such that when it's time to restart, you're starting from 0 rather than where you were.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that at least the NIH said, asked us to submit budgets and say, how much money did you lose in the shutdown? And that was a lovely exercise because it turns out they have no money to offset the difference. So, so I was on a conference call this morning with my colleagues at Columbia in biomedical engineering, and they are trying to make sure that they have a sensible, basically business-based, financial projection of what would constitute essential research.
Right.
Because even rich institutions can't can't rebuild, those kind of shutdown costs.
Thank you.
And it speaks to Lucas's issue as well. So thanks, Rose.
So I do want to address, there's one note here that Marco Castaldi, and I do want to mention that, received an ARPA-E grant in October. I did not put that on the slide because it has not been finalized through the grants office. So all these awards that are being recognized have been approved by legal, if legal was necessary, and have been authorized through the grants office. Marco's award was announced, and congratulations to Marco, because that's a huge achievement, but it has not been finalized, and hoping soon that will happen. Another question here is that the slides will be available. So I believe this is being recorded. I cannot see. So the recording will be available and the slides will be posted on the research website. Good luck finding them. Is there another question?
There's another one in chat. Do you see it?
Yeah. Why is Steinman locked? Is that? So, this is, I'm sorry, I think everybody can see this is from Elizabeth. This has been one of my fights, that Steinman is locked on weekends and on Sundays. No. So I believe we're open on Sundays now. I believe so, but we're locked on holidays. The reason is, I've been given two different reasons. One is the traffic in the building is not high enough to warrant staffing. Now that's a catch-22, because if the building were open, we'd have more traffic, and because the building's not open, we have less traffic, however it goes. But also, the campus considers Steinman as a teaching, that there are classrooms in Steinman. And so when the campus is closed, there are no classes, and therefore the building is locked. Whereas CDI, ASRC are considered research buildings. So what my goal is to get Steinman also classified as a research building. And the same is true at Marshak. There are classes in Marshak as well. So that's another reason that I'm given, that those two buildings are closed on holidays. But I'm still having those discussions. But one thing is that we did make progress, because Steinman is open on Sundays. So Annette says we're recording, and we don't have any classrooms. Yes, we do, Alex. We have the auditorium, and it's used as a classroom. Well, yeah, that's a classroom. We do have classrooms. Any other questions? You see anything, Susan?
Mitch, did you have another question?
No, he was just making.
I can unmute him.
Yes, I was going to make an editorial comment on Alex's comment. So one lecture hall obviates the other 97% of the building?
Yes.
Okay, I think there's a flaw in that thinking, perhaps. And we don't have a library. We don't have classrooms. We have one lecture hall. Could you speak to your experience in terms of how heavily populated buildings are, and whether there's going to be any adjustment for that? And I ask because, I've been into Steinman periodically, and even with the students who are coming in for teaching labs during the fall, it's a ghost town. I mean, people are in labs, and I don't have a sense for what's happening in CDI, ASRC, or Marshak. But I wonder if you could sort of speak to that, and whether that's going to impact on, or is it in terms of how you titrate the the research reductions, if at all.
So Susan, is Ken on this time?
He was, yep.
Ken, do you want to say something? I think this has an Everbridge tone to it.
I'll ask him to unmute.
Okay, ask the question.
So the question is, do we have a sense of the population in different buildings?
So to answer that is we have a sense of how many people come to campus per day. But the way, originally we had a system that was built in-house, and we could determine the number of people by building. But then we were made to go to the CUNY solution, which is Everbridge. And so the way a person would get in is they would take the Everbridge screen. And of course, then they would also have to be on a list to enter a particular building. So you would show the security guard your green check mark. They would look you up to see if you're allowed in that building, and you would go in. But that's a paper process. We worked to develop something that would interface with Everbridge, but the API that they provided it was not timely at all. Sometimes people would have to wait a half an hour before they got the combined okay, you're good from a health standpoint, and you can go into Marshak.
It was more like 3 hours lag time.
Okay, so you get it. There was a problem.
We got it. So.
Yeah. So even though we tried, that wasn't possible. So therefore, the building part is all manual. It's up to the security guard to just look, see if you're on a list. And I don't think that there's anyone keeping track of that. Now, we can, since there's two different databases, we could run a list of all the people that have been on campus that day and look at the buildings that are authorized to go in and come up with some sort of idea of how many people went into a particular building. It wouldn't account for people such as myself that are allowed to go in all buildings. It's which building did I go in? But I think for the most part, it might be somewhat useful. But at this point, we do not have that solution.
Thanks, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I've got almost 10 to, so we don't have to drag this out. What I will say is that thank you everybody for attending the town hall. We will post this. Annette said something in the chat as to where she wants to do it, and we will post on GSOE YouTube page. A link will be sent by email. Have a good holiday. Stay safe. This is a time when we do a lot of research. I mean, once class is in and our students are available, we want to be very productive, usually during the months of the end of December and the month of January. So what I ask is that everyone be safe, that you keep an eye on the news, because I'm hoping to get through the month of January and the month of February and stay open so that we can do our research. But at these reduced capacity levels of 25% or less, so that we can continue to work throughout the winter and hopefully into the spring, when we can have our vaccinations available and we can come out of this pandemic. So thanks to everyone. If you have any questions, if you want to talk further, feel free to shoot me an email. Susan as well, Susan Lima, Susan Perkins and Maria Lima as well. And thank you again. Have a good holiday.